Hello, I'm the Doctor. Welcome back to DoctorGeek. It's been a while since I've made a commentary video like this, and that's for a combination of reasons. But after 5 brand new episodes of Doctor Who, and more ups and downs than I've experienced in quite some time as a fan of this show, I think it's finally time to weigh in on the first half of Series 12. And wow, we have a lot to discuss. It goes without saying, but there's going to be a lot of spoilers in here for Series 11 and 12. And before I start, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps me out. Okay, so Series 12 started off with the spy thriller Spyfall, which was the first 2-parter of the 13th Doctor's run, and it really put a spotlight on how stupid of a decision it was to not have a 2-parter in Series 11, as these longer stories are where Doctor Who has the ability to breathe and flesh out its characters, especially if you insist on having 3 companions traveling with the Doctor, which on its face is not a bad decision, as in the classic series, the vast majority of stories were at least 4 episodes long, which put them right around the length of a modern-day 2-parter. But when you constantly have one-off episodes, it's almost impossible to not waste at least one of the characters. Doctor Who has always shined in its longer stories. And sure enough, Spyfall was a fun adventure that had the TARDIS team visiting MI6, the Australian outback, and crashing a plane all before the end of the first episode, which was by far the stronger of the 2. And while the episode did us a huge disservice by killing off Stephen Fry after about 2 scenes, overall it did a great job compared to last season of balancing its pacing. And the reveal of the Master at the end was a huge surprise, although part of that surprise was based off the fact that the Master's story arc really seems like it should have been done by now after the death of Missy, or at least tabled for a few years since we just finished her exceptional arc over Peter Capaldi's last series. So there's a lot to be said about whether bringing back the Master is even a good idea to begin with. But that's a conversation for another time in another video, and it will definitely depend on what comes after this reveal. Overall, I thought episode 1 was a nice kickoff to the series, with a good twist at the end, but nothing that we haven't seen before. So, I'm gonna give it a solid 7 Masters out of 10. Episode 2, the second part to Spyfall, didn't quite hit the mark as nicely as its lead-in did, as the explanation of the baddies, known as the haevnt, and the appearance of female historical figures Ada Lovelace and Noor Khan felt like it bogged down the episode without giving us a good enough payoff. To be frank, the addition of Ada and Noor felt very shoehorned into this episode, and all things considered, they were really not necessary to the plot, other than introducing these 2 women from the past. I was also a bit struck by the fact that the Master was somehow following the Doctor through time, even posing as a Nazi at one point, which just struck me as something that needed a bit more explanation. And the fact that it ends with the Doctor throwing the Master to the wolves as a person of color, and then forcing him to live through the 20th century, like something out of Stephen Moffat's comic relief special, really struck me as an odd way to go, and seemed almost comedic in a moment when the Master was trying to be menacing.
I've just had the most infuriating 77 years of my life, the places I've escaped from.
It's taken me 312 years to climb out of those sewers. After a lifetime of only dung slugs for food and the occasional company on those long, lonely nights.
Finally, the ultimate resolution of the haevnt is pretty lackluster, as they realize that the Master was lying to them the whole time, so they just take him and leave. Chibnall has a habit of writing episodes that feel like nothing really happens at the end, and this is a perfect example. There's a lot of excitement with a crashing plane in the B story, but that's quickly sorted out in a Bill and Ted-esque time travel loop, which honestly comes across as a bit silly. Ultimately, this episode will be remembered for the end reveal, which shows us that Gallifrey has again been destroyed, this time by the Master. And while it's a cool, stunning reveal for the second episode in a row after the Master in the first episode, it seems like a storyline that was written to create headlines, and not so much to make sense in the show, as Gallifrey has only just returned, and now it has once again been destroyed. It really makes you wonder what the curator was thinking when he told Eleven that Gallifrey falls no more. But I digress. In the end, Spyfall Part 2 didn't quite deliver like its lead-in, and it was fairly sloppy in its delivery. So, I'll give it 5 Kasavins out of 10. Unfortunately, that now brings us to Orphan 55, and man oh man, do I hate this episode. Now, a lot has already been said about Orphan 55 on the internet, so I will do my best to not dwell on it for too long. But I have to indulge myself at least a little, because there was just so much wrong with this episode, and I'm convinced that there must have been something behind the scenes that forced it to be so bad. First off, it seems like the show was trying to save money on this episode right off the bat for a multitude of reasons, but the most obvious is the terrible makeup job done on this character, who is arguably the worst looking character since the show came back in 2005. Let me know in the comments if you think something has looked worse than this. Next is the fact that it seems as though there are only 4 people in this entire luxury resort that have anything to do with running it. And the one person who owns the luxury resort is also the head of security. What? What? Literally, that detail alone is enough to tell you that this episode was not thought out in the least. There is no logical reason why the person who owns a luxury resort would also be in charge of security. Those two jobs have nothing to do with each other. Add that to the fact that there are trees growing on this supposedly dead planet, the Doctor's insane decision to bring anyone lucky enough to survive the first attack of the dregs out of the protective resort and into an armored vehicle with barely enough oxygen to survive, which includes an old woman and a child. The off-screen killing of Benny, the complete disregard for the Doctor's respiratory bypass system that we last saw literally 2 series ago, the terrible preachy message at the end when literally any other planet could have been used for this story and still driven the point of global warming home. And finally, no one, including the Doctor, even suggesting that they take the TARDIS back to Orphan 55 to save the people that they left there. Did they forget that they have a time machine? We've seen River Song leave a message through thousands of years to be picked up by the TARDIS as she jumps out of a spaceship, and you're telling me that the Doctor can't go back and pick up the people that were completely outnumbered and outgunned on a hostile planet? Oh, and Ryan sucking his thumbs sadly and romantically as he looks at the woman who's about to die? Just no words. If you were trying to make a bad Doctor Who episode, I'm not sure that you could come up with something this bad. Honestly. So, I'm stepping away, and that's all I'm going to say about Orphan 55. But hopefully, we will never have to sit through another torturous episode like that ever again. I give Orphan 55 1 dreg out of 10. Now luckily, the very next episode is a breath of fresh air, both for Series 12 and for the 13th Doctor in general. For one wonderful week, I almost forgot about everything that had come before, and I found myself actually enjoying this episode of Doctor Who. This episode featured some great acting all around, for Jodie and the TARDIS team, and especially around the portrayal of one of the most interesting historical figures in Nikola Tesla, which I thought was one of the best historical outings we've ever seen in Doctor Who. The enemies of the episode, the Skithra, actually felt like real Doctor Who villains, which was a nice break from what we've gotten lately inhuman bad guys, or even worse, societal evils that don't even really give us the satisfaction of seeing the Doctor overcome them. And while I would have liked it much better if there had been a throwaway line comparing the Skithra to the Rachnos, it's a small criticism on an otherwise great episode. However, I did have to stop the episode at one point and take a quick moment to collect myself when they implied that the Silurians were aliens. But again, this was the best episode that has been written so far for the 13th Doctor, so I'm going to do my best to enjoy it for what it is. Overall, this episode teaches us a lot about a great historical figure. It introduces a new alien menace that the Doctor has to overcome, and it was actually a pretty funny episode as well. From me, it gets 8 Skithras out of 10, leaving us plenty of room to go from here, but one of the highest episodes overall for the Chibnall era. And things continue to trend upward, at least in some areas, in the last episode to date, The Fugitive of the Judoon. Now, Fugitive of the Judoon is without a doubt the most talked about episode of Doctor Who since at least haevnt, and potentially since all the way back to the 50th anniversary episode with the advent of the War Doctor and the Curator. And to be perfectly honest, I am still processing everything that it gave us, and everything that surrounds this big reveal. But let's try to take things piece by piece. First of all, I thought the return of the Judoon was done very well. And while it's been a while since we've seen these characters on screen, anyone who's heard the recent 10th Doctor audio adventures has recently heard a very good Judoon story, so it didn't really feel like it had been too long since we'd seen these guys. The prosthetics and the CGI on the Judoon have come a long way since they first appeared, and I enjoyed seeing them used in a similar way to when they were first introduced, but with a slight twist. It was a great way to bring back the Judoon without feeling like they copied what was already done. Moving on to one of the biggest reveals of the episode, the return of Captain Jack Harkness was great to see, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't ecstatic to hear his voice over that intercom, as fans of Doctor Who have been clamoring for the return of John Barrowman for 10 years now. And when I first met him a few years ago at a Comic-Con, I told him how sad I was to have not seen him in Moffat's final season, as Jack was a character that Moffat created. But John told me it was far more likely that he would return once Chibnall took over, since the two of them are very close. And I'm so pleased that we finally got him back on our screens. Now, unfortunately, the return of Jack amounted to a glorified cameo, as it's very clear that they had him come back for one day and record some scenes after the episode had already been shot, in a nondescript room of a spaceship. But considering how well they kept the secret of his return, and since I think we can all agree that we'll see him back before too long, I'm happy to take what I can get and look forward to the future. More Jack Harkness is never a bad thing, and I'm excited to see what they do with him. So, now we get to address the elephant in the room. And oh boy, is it a doozy. After taking a new character in the episode, Ruth, to an old lighthouse, the Doctor stumbles onto her TARDIS, buried in the dirt, and Ruth breaks the glass of a chameleon circuit to reveal herself as a new incarnation of the Doctor, and all of us are sitting at home losing our collective minds. As the episode goes on, we see this new Doctor do some very undoctory things, from ripping the horn off a Judoon to rigging a gun to backfire and kill someone, not to mention just the fact that she has a gun stashed away in the first place, and just her overall demeanor. The way she's been written has created a million fan theories, ranging from alternate realities to completely new regeneration cycles. And since Chibnall has since confirmed that she is the Doctor, it leaves us with a lot to think about. Personally, I would absolutely hate it if this version of the Doctor predates William Hartnell, as I'm a massive fan of the classic series, and I would hate to see Hartnell relegated to just one of the Doctors. As in my mind, he is the Doctor, the original, and that should never change. I would love to see some clever writing, like having her be a regenerated Valeyard, or slotting her into the same timeline between 2 and 3, but having her be a secret special regeneration granted by the Time Lords. Or even a new theory I've just heard of having her be the timeless child and the timeless doctor, a doctor outside of the timelines altogether, slotting not into any incarnation, but being a part of all incarnations in and out of time. Either way, I feel like the explanation will have something to do with the timeless child, and will almost certainly have something to do with an overarching arc that might not even get fulfilled in this series. Ultimately, there is far too much information right now that we simply don't have. So I will withhold my judgment on this until we get some more answers. But I have to admit that my interest is piqued, and that is exactly what they were going for. Let's just all hope that the explanation we receive is worth all of the attention that we're giving it. I will say this though, it's mildly infuriating that the biggest mystery in Doctor Who is only a thing because two incarnations of the Doctor refused to have a simple conversation about where they fit into each other's time stream. All Jodie had to do was ask this new Doctor where she fit into the time stream and we would have our answer. But unfortunately, that didn't occur to them. So, wait we must.
I'd quite like it if you got off my ship now.
The episode concludes with kind of a whimper, as the Judoon leave after the rival Time Lord is killed by Dr. Ruth's gun. And much like Spyfall, we get that feeling that not that much happened. Like, take out all the Jack stuff and all the Ruth stuff, and it's basically the Judoon show up, they kill an old lady, threaten a bunch of people, and then they leave. But considering all of the stuff that the episode set up, that can be forgiven for now, until we have a bit more hindsight to look back on it with. Ultimately, with all the twists and turns, plus a cameo and a returning villain from a great era of the show, I'm giving Fugitive of the Judoon 7 Judoons out of 10. So, where does that leave us at the midway point of the show? We have a 7, a 5, a 1, an 8, and a 7. So other than Orphan 55, it's been a pretty consistent season. And I would definitely put it far ahead of where we were at this point last series, with the Ghost Monument and Spiders of the UK really pulling down the average of that series. And the only decent episode, in my opinion, was the Pating in the Saranga Conundrum. Series 12 so far has literally thrown the kitchen sink at us, with the return of the Master, the destruction of Gallifrey, the return of Jack, an epic warning of a lone Cyberman, and a brand new incarnation of the Doctor to contend with. And it's hard to argue against the fact that the series is definitely trending up. As long as we get some nice, well thought out explanations to these huge questions, then I am absolutely going along for the ride, and I can't wait to see what comes next. But if we get something predictable, contrived, or something that completely throws away the 56 years of the show's history that we've enjoyed since 1963, then I'm going to have a really hard time looking forward to the future. Only time will tell. So, I hope you've enjoyed this review of the first half of Series 12. Longtime viewers will remember that I used to do episode reviews in the past, and I'm going back to that this week after episode 6. But with everything I've had going on recently, it's been a bit challenging to even get out my best line compilations. But I couldn't let the channel go silent as long as new episodes were airing. Please let me know in the comments what your favorite part of the series has been so far, and leave me some ideas on what kind of videos you'd like to see in the future. My most popular videos are compilations and supercuts from the entirety of Doctor Who, and I have a bunch more coming on the horizon, but the more ideas you give me, the more content you'll get. As always, thank you all so much for being my companions on this journey today. There's much more coming soon. I'm the Doctor. Bye for now.